Hello, passengers, co-pilots, shotgun callers, and blunderbuss bellowers, and midnight riders as well. Welcome to another episode of Full Moon Empty Road. As always, I'm Jeremy, and I'll be your driver tonight. Hope everyone had a great week, and I hope you're ready for another road trip. We're headed up to Pennsylvania today to visit the Pennhurst Asylum. And it's been a while since we've done an asylum, so I figured we'd go for another one, go to another one this week. Now, before we begin, I do have a little disclaimer to start the episode. This place operated in a time unlike any in the world we live in, or unlike the world we live in today. I've marked this episode as explicit, but there's not any actual cursing. More so just words that are more frowned upon than they were a century ago. I have a few young listeners and my parents tune in as well, so I like to try to keep the episodes fairly clean. The words used in this episode aren't my views in regards to the people who are residents of the place, so please approach this with that understanding. Or you can turn the episode off now. I'm not going to be offended if you choose not to continue on the road trip with us. So, here we go. Pennhurst State School and Hospital, originally known as the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, was an institution for mentally and physically disabled individuals of southeastern Pennsylvania, located in Spring City. After 79 years of controversy, it closed on December 9th, 1987. In 1903, the Pennsylvania legislature authorized the creation of the Eastern State Institution for the feeble-minded and epileptic, and a commission was organized to take into consideration the number and status of feeble-minded and epileptic persons in the state, and to determine placement for construction to care for these residents. This commission discovered 1,146 feeble-minded persons in insane hospitals and 2,627 in almshouses, county care hospitals, reformatories, and prisons who were in immediate need of specialized institutional care. I can't hardly read. The legislation stated that the buildings would be in two groups. One for the educational and industrial department, and one for the custodial or asylum department. The institution was required to accommodate no fewer than 500 inmates or patients, with room for additions. Wesley White, the former president of the American Association of Medical Dosimetrists, was appointed superintendent of the facility. For 5 years, from 1903 to 1908, the first buildings were constructed on almost 634 acres of Crab Hill in Spring City. This was in Chester County on what was referred to be known as the Lower Campus. Out of the first few buildings constructed, F was the girls' dining room, G was the kitchen and storeroom, H, I, and K were a cottage for girls, N was the boys' dining room, P was the teacher's home, Q, T, U, and V were a cottage for boys, R was a school, W was a laundry and sewing, and X was the powerhouse. So they labeled them with letters to start out. P was used as a temporary administrative building up until the institution's opening in 1918, along with the opening of L and M in 1919. In 1921, Whitman and Wilson, first and second, were constructed along with Penn Hall for employee housing. In 1929, the assembly building was complete and functioned as the gymnasium and auditorium. The buildings on the lower campus are currently labeled with letters such as F, I, K, P, Q, R, N, U, V, T, W, and X. As I said, names would later be assigned in the 1960s. Now, there was a list of what all these places came to be named, but it was a pretty long list. I mean, it looks like they went with just about every letter of the alphabet. That's 26 different names, and you can Google Pennhurst Asylum if you want to find out what names became what locations. In 1930, the first buildings on the upper campus, otherwise known as the Female Colony, were completed and named Pershing, Buchanan, Audubon, and Keystone. Capitol Hall was erected after World War II, along with Devon constructed on the lower campus. Horizon Hall opened later in 1971. So I lied. I guess I had a few of them listed in here. The older buildings, designed by Philip H. Johnson, were two-stoned and made of red brick, terracotta, and granite trimmings. They were connected by fireproof tunnels with walkways on top of the tunnels for use to transport residents, with a parallel steam piping system, and were distributed on the 1,400-acre campus in the cottage plan formation. The buildings were designed to provide a large number of small rooms occupied by 2 or 3 beds, a few small dormitories with 8 to 10 beds, and a large day room for exercise. George Lovett was the architect for several of the buildings constructed post-1937. The Central Administration Building has a two-side porte cochere, a front portico, and a copper cupola in the center of the roof. The hospital building, Whitman and Wilson 1 and 2, are not tunnel connected, nor is Penn Hall and the powerhouse. The remaining cottage buildings are L and I shaped, with the exception of Dietary, which is Y shaped, and Devon Hall, which is H shaped. The Pennsylvania Railroad created a Pennhurst station on its Schuylkill division to accommodate Pennhurst. Coal and other supplies were delivered by rail for decades to operate the powerhouse. Tracks are still visible under the pavement behind Dietary and Devon Hall, which allow boxcars to be brought directly onto the campus. The railroad tracks have been removed and are now part of Schuylkill River Trail. The first patient was admitted on November 23rd, 1908. It only took 4 years from that point for the place to already be overcrowded and understaffed. Residents were classified into mental categories of imbecile or insane, into physical categories of epileptic or healthy, and into dental categories of good, poor, or treated teeth when admitted. The branches of industry which residents were assigned to were mattress making, shoemaking and repair, grading, farming, laundry, domestic duties, sewing, baking, butchering, painting, and working in the store. In 1913, the legislature appointed a commission for the care of the feeble-minded, which stated that disabled people were unfit for citizenship and posed a menace to the peace, and thus recommended a program of custodial care. Furthermore, the commission desired to prevent the intermixing of the genes of those imprisoned with the general population. In the biennial report to the legislature submitted by the Board of Trustees, Pennhurst's chief physician quoted Henry H. Goddard, a leading eugenist, as follows: "Every feeble-minded person is a potential criminal. The general public, although more convinced today than ever before that it is a good thing to segregate the idiot or the distinct imbecile, they have not yet been convinced as to the proper treatment of the defective delinquent, which is the broader and more dangerous individual." In 1916, The Board of Trustees initiated a plan to increase the capacity of the institution by constructing cottages specifically for women to segregate them from men, mainly to prevent pregnancies. In 1968, conditions at Pennhurst were exposed in a 5-part television news report anchored by local WCAU TV correspondent Bill Baldini. In 1981, a Time magazine article described the place as having a history of being understaffed, dirty, and violent. In 1983, 9 employees were indicted on charges ranging from slapping and beating patients, including some in wheelchairs. Because, there's no fun quite like beating someone in a wheelchair. So ranging from slapping and beating patients, which included some in wheelchairs, to arranging for patients to assault each other. So even better, let's start a asylum fight club. Had to think about how to phrase that. So much use of the word imbecile, feeble-minded, and idiot in this one. It's had to stop and think, wait a minute, how do I need to say that? So yeah, I guess fight clubs go back a long way, and the first rule of Fight Club, it stood true back, what was that, the 1980s, 1981, that's when that was. So that was only, 40 years ago. The Haldeman case, which resulted in the closure of the institution, also detailed widespread patient abuse. And if you want, that's Haldeman, Halderman, HALDERMAN. The Haldeman case, it was pretty much once that case hit, that was pretty much the death of the asylum, in a sense. So if you want to look that up, hit up Google. It was pretty lengthy, and the sites I went to all kind of made mention of it, but a couple of them also had, I guess, like the keynotes to it, best way I can think to put it. But it was a lengthy thing, so those keynotes probably would have us here for the next hour. Who knows? That may be something on down the line that I cover. Maybe I make a separate kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Collection of episodes or something. But yeah, if you want to look it up, it's called the Haldeman case. You can probably just Google like Haldeman case, Pennhurst Asylum. The United States Department of Veteran Affairs, or the VA, acquired the upper campus of Pennhurst and began work to reuse it as a veterans home. In 1986, the upper campus cottage units reopened as the Western Veterans Center, Southeastern Veterans Center. In 1990, renovations began on Horizon Hall, one of the newest buildings at Pennhurst, as part of a project to establish a nursing facility at the Veterans Center. It reopened in 1993 as Coates Hall, and after many years of determining what to do with Pennhurst, Congressman Jim Gerlach sought to establish a federal veteran cemetery at Pennhurst in 2003, but the VA rejected the proposal. In 2015, the Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance began working with the Southeastern Veterans Center to obtain the superintendent's residence for a future museum and interpretive center. By the end of 2016, demolition had begun on some of the buildings of the upper campus. In 2017, bookings to daytime history tours, photography tours, and overnight paranormal investigations became available through the Haunted Attractions websites. Proceeds from the tours go towards the upkeep of the grounds and restoration of the remaining buildings. So these days, you can go investigate Pennhurst. I believe some actually pretty big name paranormal groups have been there, but you can rent it out for the night and do an overnight investigation of the place. Travel Channel show Destination Fear filmed at location for the 5th episode of their first season in 2019. On June 8th, 2021, heavy metal band Motionless in White performed their Deadstream 2 live at Pennhurst concert on the grounds in front of the main building entrance. The concert was streamed the following day. As far as hauntings go, there are a few. The place has been investigated numerous times, and people have reported hearing. One of the main reports is hearing sounds of children crying or laughing. Now, when I chose this episode, it was more on the history of the place rather than the hauntings. And, I'd heard of the place in a sense, I don't think I realized it was what it was. But when I chose it, it was after reading a little bit on the history. I kind of figured there would be more to the hauntings. But we're actually getting close to the end of the episode. There weren't too many detailed hauntings that I could find online. Now, granted, it's been a crazy week. My week's still not over, but up until the point of today that last night I finally got the episode finished. I had started on it early last week, and it feels like I got to put maybe all of 2 days into writing it. So, the history section here, it's going to be brief, probably just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to close out the episode. I do apologize for that. I especially with last week's episode, I really enjoyed covering all those hauntings. But with last week's episode, I guess with it being such a high profile place, it had a lot of eyewitness accounts available online, whereas this one doesn't really. Just moving on. Staff and caretakers of the property say that the building, as well as the underground tunnel network, are severely haunted by spirits of the patients who suffered and died there. Reports of slamming doors, disembodied footsteps and voices, sounds of vomiting and crying are heard from seemingly empty rooms. That's a lot of that I get. Those are all the pretty standard sounds you hear from somewhere that's haunted, but sounds of vomiting. I hope nobody books a tour there that's a sympathy puker. They start hearing the sound and they're like, oh no. Some witnesses have even reported the apparition of a little girl moaning or roaming around the campus. So, roaming, not no moaning Myrtle at Pennhurst. So some witnesses have even reported the apparition of a little girl roaming around the campus looking lost. The sounds of children playing and crying is also a common occurrence. Here we are again. That's 3 times now? Someone has mentioned the sounds of children crying, which this was an asylum. And I imagine it was kind of an all-ages place, so, And, I know earlier they talked about more segregation by gender just to prevent pregnancies, but I don't see that being something that's 100% foolproof. I mean, if you're going to get some, you're going to get some. Most of the spirits at Pennhurst are believed to be friendly, just looking for someone living to communicate with, to tell their story to. Reports of satanic worship have come to the property, however, so maybe not everything's quite as friendly. I don't know. I personally don't know much about satanic worship, but so I'm not gonna divulge on any of that. But yet another asylum plagued plagued by overcrowding and understaffing. At this point, it's a sad story on a broken record. And I will say that little last piece right there, just to endure all that those people had to in life, and to be described as relatively friendly in the afterlife. Whether you believe there's a life after death, whether it be a paradise, eternal damnation, or continuing on here just beyond an unseen veil, that's impressive. Just no matter how you look at it, to have lived out most of your life here, and now you just kind of want to be heard. And that's, to me, that says a lot. Regardless of why they were put in there, it kind of speaks to the character beyond the mental illness. You know, that's very. Like I say, it's another sad story. It's another broken record. It's another asylum we're at, and overcrowding, understaffing, dirty, just everything. Maybe they'll get it figured out one day. Maybe they'll get it figured out. I don't know. But, you know, we hadn't done an asylum in a while, so I figured it would be a good place to start, you know, or I guess a good place to jump back to. But I'll be honest with you, I get kind of pissed off reading on these asylums and just how the people were treated, you know. Which in turn makes for a good haunt. You know, back in my ghost hunting days, you know, and I've said this before, we heard, you know, things with just high charged, raw, emotional energy leaves imprints that stick around long after everybody's gone. And, you know, this probably has a lot of stories out there. That's something I would like to move into one day if it's to the point where I can do this a little bit more regularly. I would like to start interviewing people that do, you know, that have been to places like this. Maybe if we can get my social media presence to grow enough, we can get to the point where we're like, okay, so let's reach out to so-and-so who investigated this place and kind of get their take on it, you know. But that's really all I have for Pennhurst Asylum today. And so we're just going to kind of wind down the episode here. You can, speaking of social medias, you can follow me on Facebook at FMER Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at FMER Podcast. I don't think I've actually uploaded to Instagram yet, and I need to get that one off the ground too. You can follow me on TikTok at Full Moon Empty Road. And I think and Twitter at Full Moon Empty RD. And if you want to suggest an episode, you can reach out to me, because I run all of those accounts. I mean, you can kind of tell because they don't get a lot of updates throughout the week. But so you'll be reaching out to me directly, and you can just, you know, shoot a message and say, hey, let's hear something about this place, or I've read about this one that sounds really interesting. Won't you tell us about it? Or, you know, tell me about a place you've been that you've had an experience. Tell me about your experiences. Honestly, if that's something I could get done, I wouldn't mind doing like a mailbag episode where, you know, say 5 people have written in to say, hey, this was an experience I had. I say 5 people, 5. It could be 50. We could break that down into like 3 episodes or something. But yeah, you know, just reach out to me there. If you want to either make a suggestion or leave feedback, I'm fine with either. And I also noticed earlier this week, from my demographic, I saw a listener pop up from Germany. So that is my 4th location now. Aside from America, which of course most of my listeners are going to be American, because, you know, I'm just a old country boy from Tennessee, so of course that's going to happen. But also have seen a listener pop up from Brazil, a listener pop-up from Saudi Arabia, and a listener pop-up from Germany. So I want to say thank you to everybody who has checked out the podcast, and please come back. And to my German listener, thank you so much. I meant to look up how to say thank you in German, because the only thing I really know is Ich liebe dich, which I think means I love you. And I probably butchered it, but you know what? You can take that too if you want. But thank you so much. And I really appreciate everybody jumping on here. And for anybody who is a pretty standard follower of the channel, feel free to tell your friends and family about it. I'd love to have them here. I'd love to have them listening in. I'd love to have them share their stories. Just anything we can do. But before we go visit Tiffany at the Vinyl and Sublime Company. She can do all things from decals, shirts, tumblers, mugs, and much, much more. She has created the first Full Moon Empty Road t-shirt, and you can find her on Etsy at the Vinyl and Sublime Co. She even does custom orders. To request a custom order, you can email, text, or use the request a custom order at her Etsy shop. Drop her a line at the Vinyl and Sublime Co at gmail.com, or shoot her a text to 706-913-7837 to get started on your custom order today. Go now and tell her I sent you. Now, let's go home.